The festival fires of Catherine Hold burned high enough to scorch the underbellies of clouds. Mareska stood at the back of the courtyard with a tray of unpoured wine balanced against her hip, and watched her husband forget she existed. He stood on the speaking stone, the alpha of the Hollow Mere Pack, the man who had taken her as mate at 17 because his father commanded it, and his pack required an heir. His name was Valor Thane, and he was beautiful in the cold way that mountains were beautiful, all hard angles and weather-cut stillness. Tonight he wore the dark green of the midsummer oaths, and the firelight caught in his black hair, and not once in the last 3 hours had his eyes found her in the crowd. He had stopped looking for her years ago. She had stopped expecting him to. The wine tray shook a little. Mireska steadied it with both hands and reminded herself that she had survived 4 winters of this. 4 winters of being the alpha's mate in name only. 4 winters of sleeping in a room down the hall from his because he had told her, on their wedding night, that he did not believe in pretending. "I will not lie to you," he had said. "I do not love you. I will not learn to. But you will be cared for, and you will be safe, and the pack will see you honored." She had been 17. She had nodded as if she understood what he was offering and what he was withholding. She had not understood for a long time. She understood now. The honor he had promised had become a kind of slow erasure. She moved through the keep like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. The kitchen women had stopped greeting her by her name and taken to calling her lady, the way one might call a chair. The pack warriors looked through her at meals. Even Valor's mother, the dowager, had taken to addressing her in the third person, as if speaking about a piece of furniture in the room. And tonight, at the high festival, with 3 other packs come down from the northern ridges to renew the old alliances, Valor had not introduced her once, not when the Brenhall envoy asked who the woman in grey was, not when the Riverstone Pack second made the polite inquiry that strangers always made. Not when his own underwarden gestured toward her with an open hand, expecting the lord to claim his lady. Valor had answered each time with the same flat phrasing. "She is from the southern villages. She tends the household." As if she were a hire. As if the binding marks under his collar and under her dress were nothing. As if 4 years of his name on her household ledgers meant less than the bread on the festival tables. The first time tonight, she had told herself she misheard. The second time, she had told herself it was clumsiness, not cruelty. The third time, she had stopped telling herself anything. A young serving boy bumped past her with a fresh tray and murmured an apology, and Mireska realized her face was wet. She set the wine down on the nearest trestle and walked, slowly and without hurry, out of the courtyard and through the inner gate and into the dim corridor that ran beneath the keep's eastern wall. She made it to the storeroom before her knees gave. There was a sack of milled flour against the far wall, and she folded down onto it with the careful slowness of a woman who had taught her body never to make noise. She pressed both hands flat against her stomach. She had known for 11 days. 11 days of waking before dawn to be sick in the basin and burying the linens before the maid could find them. 11 days of carrying the news under her ribs like a coal she did not yet know whether to cup or drop. She had planned to tell him tonight, after the festival, after the alliances were renewed and the visiting alphas had ridden home. She had planned the words and rehearsed the place. She had imagined, with a stupidity she could not now believe she had permitted herself, that the news might do what 4 years had not done, that a child might pull his eyes toward her at last. Instead, she had stood with the unpoured wine against her hip and watched him answer the underwarden with that flat, bored voice. "She is from the southern villages. She tends the household." Mireska pressed her palms harder against her belly and made a sound that she was glad no one was near enough to hear. She would not tell him. She decided it there, on a sack of flour in a cold corridor, with her hair coming loose from the festival pins. She would not tell him, and she would not stay. She would not raise a child inside the slow erasure that had eaten 4 years of her own life. She would not let the small thing under her ribs grow up listening to its father introduce its mother as the woman who tended the household. She rose. Her legs held. She found that interesting. The road south from Catherine Hold ran through Brenhall lands and then into the river country, and finally into the long plains where no pack claimed authority and no alpha would think to look. She had a half-sister there, a woman named Tevra who had married a herbsman and raised goats, and not spoken to anyone from the Hollowmere in 9 years. Mireska had her grandmother's silver pin and 12 coins of her own, and the cloak she had been wearing when she first crossed into this keep as a bride. It was enough. It would have to be enough. She climbed the back stair to the room where her trunk sat, and she packed in the dark, and she did not light a candle because the one window in that room faced the courtyard, and she did not want to look down at the fires again. She wrapped the silver pin in a kerchief. She left the ceremonial cloak Valor had given her on its hook. She paused at the threshold for one breath and pressed her fingertips to her belly and said, almost soundlessly, "You and me." Then she went down the back stair and through the kitchen yard and out the postern gate that the boy who watched it was always too drunk on festival nights to see properly, and onto the south road. She walked. She did not look back at the keep. She did not look back at the fires. She did not look back at the man on the speaking stone, who would 3 days later wake to an empty room and a half-packed trunk, and the slow first understanding that he had spent 4 winters letting a candle burn down beside him without ever once looking at the light. By the time the festival horns sounded the midnight oath at Catherine Hold, Mireska of the Hollowmere had been gone for 2 hours, and not a single soul inside those walls had thought to look for her. The river country in early spring smelled of wet stone and crushed mint, and Mireska had learned to love it the way a woman learns to love a second husband, slowly and on purpose. She had been gone from Catherine Hold for almost 8 months. The plains village where her half-sister Tevra lived was called Senau Cross, and it sat on the meeting of 2 slow rivers and 1 hard road. The houses were low and built of pale river clay. The people kept goats and bees and an old wariness of packlords that had been bred into them across 3 generations. They had taken Mireska in because Tevra had vouched for her, and because the herbsman, Tevra's husband, had a kind streak that ran wider than his sense. She had not used her own name. She had given her name as Sila, because it had been her grandmother's name on the southern side, and because Mireska of the Hollowmere had to be a woman who had drowned in a river, or wandered into a snow, or otherwise simply ceased to exist if the news were ever to drift back north. She had cut her hair to the jaw with a paring knife the second night, and watched the long dark coil of it lie on the cottage floor like something she had killed. The child had come in early spring. A boy, small and quiet and slow to cry, with eyes that had stayed the dark blue of newborns long past the week they were supposed to change. Tevra had midwifed her on the kitchen floor, with the herbsman pacing outside in the rain, and when it was over, Tevra had set the child on Mireska's chest and said, plainly, "Well, he's yours. The rest is your business." Mireska had named him Orin. She had not told anyone in Senau Cross who his father was, and no one had been rude enough to press her. The story, as the village understood it, was that Saela was a southern widow whose alpha husband had died of fever before the child was born, and that she had come to her sister to start again. It was a thin story, and the villagers knew it was a thin story, and they had agreed, by the quiet pact of small communities everywhere, to let the thinness stand. She had thought she would grieve forever. She had been wrong about that. The grief was still there, but it had thinned out into something more like a low weather. She felt it in the morning when she woke and reached, before remembering, for a man who had never in 4 years reached back. She felt it sometimes when Oren laughed, because the shape of his mouth when he laughed was Valor's exactly, and there was nothing she could do about that. But she had stopped expecting the grief to kill her. She had begun, in small ways, to live around it. What she had not expected was the binding mark. Among pack kind, when an alpha took a mate by the old right, he laid a binding mark on her. The mark sat just under the collarbone, where bone met soft skin, and it was meant to fade in 3 cases. If the alpha rejected the mate, if the mate rejected the alpha, or if one of them died. Mireska had been gone 8 months. She had spoken her own rejection aloud, in the cold corridor under Catherine Hold, and again on the South Road, and again every night since. By every law of binding she had ever been taught, the mark on her collarbone should have faded to nothing within a moon. It had not faded. It still pulsed faintly under her skin, warm in the cold months and cool in the warm ones, like a small live thing that had not been told the contract was over. Some nights, when the village had gone quiet and Oren slept in the cradle beside her bed, she could feel the mark warm under her palm, and she could swear, against everything she knew about how bindings worked, that something on the other end of it was reaching for her. She refused to believe it, believing it was the kind of thing that broke women. So she did not believe it, and she went on with her days, and she helped Tevra tend the bees and trade the honey at the river market, and she let the women of Senno Cross teach her how to grind the bitter root that kept fevers down, and she lived. That was where matters stood on the morning the rider came. He came on a gray horse, alone, up the river road from the south, which was the wrong direction for trouble. Trouble in Senno Cross always came from the north, where the packlands were. A man riding alone from the south was almost certainly a traitor or a tax counter or a deserter, and none of those required the village to do more than feed him and wave him on. Mireska was at the low stone trough outside the herbsman's cottage, washing linen with Oren sitting on a folded cloak beside her gnawing on a piece of dried apple. She heard the hoofbeats and she did not look up. The rider's hooves slowed at the trough. A man's voice said, "Your pardon, ma'am? Is this the road to Senno Cross proper?" She raised her head. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps her own age, perhaps a year older. He wore a riding coat the color of wet bark and a sword that looked old and well cared for. His hair was the dark red of riverbed clay. His eyes, when she met them, were a startling pale gold, pack eyes, alpha eyes. Mireska's hands stilled in the water. He saw her stillness, and he saw, she knew, the binding mark at the open neckline of her shift, and he registered both, and his expression did something careful. He did not dismount. He did not edge his horse closer. He simply held her gaze for a beat, and then, very slowly, looked away from the mark and back at her face, as if to say, "I will not pretend I did not see it, but I will not press." "This was Senno Cross," he said. He said it quietly. "I'm Halen Vor. I've been sent to speak with the village headman about the autumn caravan road. May I trouble you for the way to his door?" It was the politest thing any alpha had ever said to her in her life. She told him the way. He thanked her. He did not look at the mark again. He nudged the gray horse on, and Mireska watched him go. And Oren reached up and pulled at her sleeve, and she realized she had been holding her breath for longer than she should have. That should have been the end of it. It was not. He came back the next afternoon with a small clay pot of southern honey he had bought at the village store, and he set it on the low stone wall by the trough without speaking. He came back 2 days after that with a length of soft wool he said had been left over from his own rider's cloak and might suit a child for swaddling. He came back the next week with a book. The book was the part that broke something in her. It was a thin volume, hand-stitched, in the trade tongue, of stories from the southern coast. He set it on the wall and said mildly, "My mother used to read this to me. You strike me as a woman who reads." Mireska stared at him. No one had ever, in her entire life, said to her, "You strike me as a woman who reads." She said, "What you want?" He thought about the question. He took it seriously, which was the second strange thing about him. "I want to know your name," he said at last. "Your real one. I will not ask twice. I will not press if you do not want to give it. But I have come 3 times now, and I have not asked. And I do not want to keep treating you like a stranger when I do not feel that you are one." She did not know why she said it. Even afterward she could not say why. She heard her own voice, low. "Give him the truth." "Mireska," she said. "Mireska of the Hollow Mere?" Halen Vor's face did something then that she would remember, later, for the rest of her life. It did not flinch. It did not pity. It did not flicker with that small calculation she had seen in every other man's face when they understood she was the bound mate of a more powerful alpha. It simply, quietly, accepted. "Mireska," he said. He said her name like it was a word that mattered. "I am glad to know you." That was the spring of it. The summer was longer. He did not court her in any way she could have named. He came to the village on his road business, and he stopped at the trough, and he asked her opinion on things. The road tariffs, the caravan timings, the book he had brought her last week. He asked her opinion as if it were valuable. He listened to her answers as if they changed his thinking. Twice he changed his thinking out loud in front of her and said, "You are right. I had not seen it that way." By midsummer, the women of Senno Cross had begun to tease her, gently, the way village women teased. By late summer, she had begun to laugh at the teasing, which was the more dangerous sign. By the first cold week of autumn, Halen Vor asked her, on the riverbank, with Oren asleep in the carry sling against her chest, if she would consider returning south with him to his own holding, the small free territory of Vor Reach, where he was alpha of a young and modest pack, and where, he said carefully, she would not be a hire, and she would not be a household, and she would not be lady spoken in the third person, but she would be exactly what she chose to be, and Oren would be raised as his own son if she wished it, or as her son under his roof if she preferred. She did not answer him that day. She did not answer him for a week. She lay awake at night with the binding mark warm under her palm and Oren's breath small in the cradle beside her, and she tried to find a single reason not to say yes. She could not find one, so she said yes. That was the night the news came. It came on the lips of a wool trader who had passed through Brenhall lands the week before, a man who stopped at the herbsman's cottage to sell a bolt of grey cloth and stayed for the offered tea. He drank his tea, and he set the cup down, and he said, as casual gossip, "Well, the great lord up north is finally tearing his own walls down, did you hear?" Mireska's hand stilled on her own cup. "What lord?" said Tevra. "The Alpha of the Hollow Mere," said the wool trader. "Valor Thane. He has been raving for half a season. His pack second has had to ride to 3 other holds to ask for help managing him. The man does not sleep. He has been riding the south roads for months. Looking, they say. Looking for someone. He has put a bounty out. 1,000 silver, on the head of any rider who can bring him word of his lost wife." Mireska set her cup down very carefully on the table. Tevra said, "His lost wife." "That is what the bounty calls her," said the trader, "the lost wife of the Hollowmere. He says she is with child. He says he will tear the south apart, stone by stone, until he finds her. He says," and here the trader smiled the small crooked smile of a man enjoying a strange piece of news, "he says he has only just understood that he loved her." Mireska did not move. She did not move for so long that Tevra reached under the table and took her hand. Outside, on the river road, in the cold blue light of the autumn evening, a single horseman was already riding north out of Senno Cross at a full, hard gallop. He carried a bounty notice in his coat. He had recognized the southern widow Scylla 10 days before, and he had been waiting for the right wool trader to come through and confirm what he already knew, and now he was riding to claim 1,000 silver pieces from the alpha of the Hollowmere. Mireska did not see him go. She only knew, with a certainty that rose under her ribs like cold water, that the small good life she had begun to build in Senno Cross had just ended, and that the man she had finally said yes to did not yet know what was coming down the north road toward them. She told Halen Vor that night. She told him at his small camp outside the village, where he kept a tent and 2 riders and the gray horse staked on a long line. She walked out to him after Oren was asleep, with her cloak pulled tight against the cold, and she sat on a folded blanket across from his low fire, and she told him everything. She told him whose mate she had been. She told him about the 4 winters and the slow erasure and the festival night and the unpoured wine. She told him about Oren's father not being a southern dead man at all, but the alpha of the Hollowmere himself. She told him about the wool trader and the bounty. She watched his face the whole time, and she watched it for the small flinch she had seen in every other man's face when she had told him a piece of the truth, and not all of it. She watched for the moment he would do the calculation and decide she was not worth the trouble. Halen Vor did not flinch. He listened. He fed the small fire once. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he was quiet for a long count, and then he said, not the question she had braced for. He said, "Are you frightened of him?" Mireska realized with a small cold shock that she did not know how to answer that. She said, "I do not know what he is now. The man I left would not have raved. The man I left would not have ridden. The man I left would not have known I was missing for 3 days. I do not know what to call the man the wool trader described." Halen nodded, slowly, as if she had told him exactly what he had needed to hear. He said, "Then we will not assume. We will move. He has put bounty riders on every south road by now. If we leave at first light tomorrow, we can be at the Vor Reach border in 5 days. My pack will not give you up. He cannot take you back from inside my hold without breaking 3 treaties and starting a war he is not ready to fight. You and Oren will be safe," she said. "And you?" He looked at her across the fire. He said, very quietly, "Mireska, I asked you to come because I want to spend the rest of my life sitting across from you on cold nights. That has not changed, because the man you used to belong to has remembered, 8 months too late, that he had something. That has not changed at all. If anything, it makes me more certain. Because I think you have been told for a long time that you are the woman who tends the household, and I would like to be the man who, every morning, hands you the day and asks what you would like to do with it." She did not cry that night. She had thought she would. She had thought she would weep on the man's chest and break, finally, after 8 months of holding it. Instead, she felt something inside her that had been locked since she was 17 turn over once, very slowly, like a key in an old lock, and click. She walked back to the herbsman's cottage in the dark, and she lay down beside Oren's cradle, and she slept, for the first time since she had left Catherine Hold, all the way through to the morning. That was the night her binding mark stopped pulsing. She did not notice at first. She noticed at noon the next day, when she was packing the last of her things into the canvas bag Halen had brought her, and her hand brushed the hollow of her own collarbone, and she realized she had not felt the small live warmth there since she had walked back from the camp. The mark was still on her skin, but it had gone quiet, as if, somewhere on the other end of the line, the thing that had been reaching for her had finally let go. She told no one. She did not have time to tell anyone. By the time she had finished packing, the rider was almost at Catherine Hold with the bounty notice, and the rider's horse was harder than a man should ride a horse, and the news of where the lost wife of the Hollowmere had been seen would reach Valor Thane before sundown, and Valor Thane was, even in that hour, already in the saddle, because he had been sleeping in his riding leathers for months waiting for exactly this news, and he was already 300 miles south of where the wool trader had said he was, because his own scouts had told him a week ago that a woman matching the description was in Senno Cross. He arrived at first light the morning of the day Mareska and Halen Vor were to leave. He arrived alone. Not even his pack second with him. He had outridden them. He had come down the north road through the night on a black horse he had nearly killed under him, and he came into Senno Cross at the grey hour before sunrise, when the wood smoke was just beginning to rise from the village chimneys, and he stopped in the small square in front of the herbsman's cottage and dismounted, and stood there in the road. He did not knock. He did not call out. He stood there with the reins in his hand and looked at the cottage door, and the look on his face, the few villagers who saw it later said, was the look of a man who had already received the worst news of his life and was waiting only for someone to confirm it. Mireska opened the door at the noise of the horse. She was holding Oren against her hip. She was wearing the travel cloak Halen had brought her. The canvas bag was on the bench by the door. She had been about to walk out and meet Halen at the camp and ride south. She and Valor Thane saw each other across 20 paces of cold mud. He did not move. He looked at her. He looked at the child on her hip. He looked at the child's face, which was his face. He looked at her cloak, which was a man's cloak, cut for a rider, and not a cloak any of his own house would have given her. He looked back at her face. He said her name. He said it the way a man says a word he has been practicing in his mouth for months without ever speaking it aloud. He said, Mireska. She did not answer him. She stood in the doorway with her son against her hip, and she looked at the man she had been bound to for 4 winters and 8 months, and she discovered that she did not feel afraid, and she did not feel angry, and she did not feel the great wave of grief she had imagined feeling if she ever had to look at his face again. She felt, of all things, a kind of distant pity, the way one feels for a stranger who has come to one's door at the wrong hour to deliver a letter that no longer matters. She heard hoofbeats on the river road. Halen Vor came around the corner of the herbsman's barn at a fast trot, and he saw Valor Thane in the square, and he saw the black horse, and he saw, as any pack-blooded man would see, exactly who the stranger was. He did not draw his sword. He did not call his men up. He swung down from the gray horse and walked, unhurried, and stopped at Mireska's side, and he laid one hand lightly against the small of her back. It was a gesture of presence, not possession. It said, I am here. It did not say, she is mine. But Valor Thane saw it. He saw it, and Mireska watched his face go, very slowly, the color of cold ash. She did not know that an alpha could look like that. She had not known, in 4 winters, that the man's face was capable of that expression at all. Halen said quietly, beside her, in a voice meant only for her, You do not have to speak to him. You owe him no word. Tell me what you want, and I will do it. Mireska looked at the man in the road. She looked at the man at her side. She looked down at her son's dark blue eyes, which were her son's father's eyes, and which had been watching the stranger in the road with the calm, interested attention of a child who did not yet know he should be afraid. She made a choice. She did not know, in that moment, that it was the most important choice she would ever make. She would understand that later. She understood, in that moment, only that she had one chance to set the terms of the rest of her life, and that she had been letting other people set the terms for 22 years, and that she would not let it happen again. She turned her face toward Halen Vor and not toward Valor Thane, and she said, clearly, loud enough for the man in the road to hear, Please take Oren. I would like to speak with this man alone. Halen took the child without a word. Valor Thane, in the road, made a sound that was not a word at all. It was the sound of a man who, until that exact second, had not understood that he had already lost. Halen carried Orin around the side of the herbsman's cottage and out of sight, and the village square emptied, and Mireska Thane stood in her doorway and waited for the man who had given her his name to come close enough to be spoken to. Valor did not come close. He took one step away from his horse and stopped, as if a line had been drawn in the mud he could not cross without permission. He looked at her the way a man looks at a structure he has watched burn from a distance and is only now arriving to count the dead. He said, "You are alive." She said, "Yes." He said, "The child is mine." She said, "Yes." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, she saw, with something that was not quite shock and not quite satisfaction, that they were wet. She had been bound to him for 4 winters and 8 months. She had never, in all of that time, seen Valor Thane's eyes wet. He said, "I have been a dead man for half a year. I did not know I was. I want to tell you everything. I want to explain. I have rehearsed every word 1,000 times, and I cannot now find one of them. I have not slept in. I cannot remember how long. May I sit? May I sit on this step? I will not come closer. I will not touch you." She gestured at the low stone step of the cottage. He sat. He sat the way a much older man sits, lowering himself with both hands against his knees. The reins of the black horse trailed in the mud beside him. He did not seem to notice. She did not sit. She stood in the open doorway above him and folded her arms across her chest, where the binding mark still lay quiet under her shift. And she said, "Speak." He spoke. He told her about the morning he had woken, 3 days after the festival, and reached for her down the hall and found her room empty and her trunk half-packed. He told her how he had laughed first, the small, confused laugh of a man who assumes a joke. He told her how the laugh had stopped. He told her about the search, the first riders, the first week of riders, when he had still believed she had only gone to a cousin and would be returned by supper. The second week, when he had begun to understand. The third week, when he had stopped sleeping. The fourth week, when he had ridden out himself for the first time and had not stopped riding for any meaningful length of time since. He told her about the night, 11 weeks in, when his pack second had locked him in his own quarters because he had begun to howl in the great hall in front of the visiting Brenhall envoys. He told her about the night, 16 weeks in, when he had broken his own hand against the stone of the practice yard because he had realized, finally, what every other man in the keep had known for 4 years and had been afraid to tell him, that he had loved her since the second winter, that he had loved her and had not known it, because no one had ever taught him what loving looked like, and the only model he had been given was his own father's coldness, and he had repeated his father back to her every day of their marriage, like a man reciting a prayer in a language he did not know was a curse. He told her about the bounty. He told her about riding south through 5 provinces. He told her, finally, in a voice that was no longer the voice she remembered, about the 11 nights, scattered across the months, when he had felt the binding mark warm under his own collarbone and had known, with a certainty that nothing in his life had prepared him for, that she was alive, somewhere, and that the binding had not faded because she had not stopped, somewhere underneath all of it, loving him. Mireska heard him out. She did not interrupt. She did not soften. She watched the man on her step, and she felt the long, flat weather of grief that had been her companion for 8 months, and she let him finish. When he finished, she said, "You are not wrong." His head came up. She said, "The binding did not fade. You are right about that. I felt it too. For 8 months, I felt it. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself it was a defect of the right. I told myself 100 things. None of them were true. The reason it did not fade is that I did love you, Valor. I loved you for 4 winters in a house that had no room for it. I loved you so well and so quietly that you mistook my love for furniture, That is not your fault. It is also not mine. It is just what happened. She stopped. She drew one breath. She said, "You should know that the binding stopped pulsing the night before last." His face did something then that she would think about, later, for a very long time. It was the face of a man who has been holding a rope in the dark for months and has just felt the rope go slack in his hand. He said, "The night before last." She said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because the night before last a man asked me to ride south with him, and I said yes. And I meant it. And something in me that had been waiting on you for 4 winters and 8 months understood, finally, that it had been waiting on a door that was never going to open." Valor did not speak. He looked down at his own hands, the right one bandaged still from the practice yard stone, and he turned the bandage over once, slowly, as if reading it. He said, "The man with the gray horse." She said, "His name is Halen Vor. He is the alpha of a small pack to the south. He has come to this village 3 times a month for 6 months. He has brought my son a length of wool and a clay pot of honey and a book. He has asked my opinion on caravan tariffs as if my opinion mattered. He has not once, not one single time, looked through me as if I were a chair." She paused. She said, "Valor, I am telling you this not to wound you. I am telling you this because you have ridden a long way to find me, and you deserve to know what you have found. I am not the woman you left in your house. That woman died on the road south. The woman standing on this step is someone else. She has been built, slowly, in a village you have never heard of, by a sister who took her in, and a child who needed her, and a man who treated her like a queen because he could not imagine treating her any other way." Valor's bandaged hand closed into a fist. He said, very low, "What you want me to do?" She said, "I want you to ride home." He flinched. She said, "Hear me. I am not finished. I want you to ride home, and I want you to release the bounty, and I want you to release the binding, formally, before your pack, and before the elder rite. I want you to free me. Not because I hate you. I do not hate you. I cannot afford to hate you and also raise your son. I want you to free me because it is the only way I can become the woman I have begun to be without spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for the rider you will send." Valor was silent for a long time. She watched him. She watched the man she had married at 17 sit on her doorstep at 22 and absorb the only request she had ever made of him in their entire shared life. He said, finally, "And Oren." She said, "Oren is mine. He has been mine since the first morning I was sick into a basin in a cold corridor under your keep. He will know your name. I will not lie to him about who fathered him, but he will not be raised in your house, Valor. He will not be raised by a man who does not yet know how to love a woman, learning on a child. I will not give him that." Valor's eyes closed. When he opened them, he said something she had not expected. He said, "There is a thing you do not know. I came south alone for a reason. I did not bring my pack second. I did not bring my warders. I came alone because the day the bounty rider arrived at Catherine Hold with the news that you had been seen in Senno Cross, my mother sent a separate rider, south, behind me, with separate orders." Mireska's hand went still at her side. She said, "What orders?" Valor looked at her. His face was very pale. He said, "My mother does not want you found, Mireska. She wants you ended. She has wanted it since the festival night. She has known about the child since the 2nd month. She has had her own people in this village for longer than my people have. She did not send me a rider with orders. She sent a different kind of rider, a pair of them. They will not be looking for you. They will be looking for any woman in Senno Cross with an infant son and a binding mark she is trying to hide. They will be in this village by tomorrow morning at the latest. Possibly tonight." The cold under Mireska's ribs was not new. She had been cold under her ribs for a long time, but this was a different cold, and she knew it. She said, "Why you are telling me this?" He said, "Because I have ridden every road south for half a year, and the only thing I learned in any of it was that I want you to live. I do not care under whose roof. I do not care in whose name. I came down here this morning to tell you that I would let you go. I came to tell you that and to ask you to let me see the child once. And then I came around the corner and I saw the man's hand at your back, and I lost my mind for a moment, and I stopped being able to speak. I am telling you about my mother because if you ride south at first light tomorrow with the man with the gray horse, you ride into her riders. They will be coming up the south road. They will reach Seno Cross before you reach the crossroads. You will not make Vor reach." Mireska stared at him. She said, "You are saying I cannot run." The thing he had not yet asked her to do, because he was not, for the first time in their marriage, asking her for anything at all. She could let him stand between her and his mother. She heard footsteps behind her. Halen Vor had come back, with Oren asleep against his shoulder, and he had heard the last of it. She could see from the set of his jaw that he had heard enough. She did not know yet what she was going to do. She knew only that the man she had said yes to 2 nights ago was standing at her right shoulder with her son in his arms, and the man she had said yes to at 17 was sitting on her doorstep with his bandaged hand on his knee, and that the woman she had become in the 8 months between the two of them was about to have to be both of them at once. She did not know if she was strong enough. She had a very bad feeling that she was about to find out. They held council in the herbsman's kitchen. Tevra had banked the fire and put Oren down in the cradle in the back room and closed the door, and then she had set a kettle on the hob and sat down at her own kitchen table across from her sister and the 2 alphas, and she had said, plainly, "I am not leaving this room. Whatever you decide tonight will be decided in front of someone who loves her, or it will not be decided in this house." Mireska had not argued. Halen had not argued. Valor had looked once at the herbsman's wife, and then had set his bandaged hand flat on the kitchen table and said, "Agreed." That was the first thing the three of them ever agreed on. They sat around the table for almost 2 hours. Halen wanted to ride. He wanted to leave that night, immediately, with Mireska and Oren and his 2 riders, west across the river fords instead of south, and to come at Vor Reach from the long road, the herder's road, the one no Hollowmere rider would think to watch. He laid the route out on the kitchen table with 3 spoons and a cup, and the route was a good route, and Mireska understood that Halen Vor was not only kind but also a careful man, and that careful men in pack country lived longer than bold ones. Valor wanted to stand. Valor wanted, he said, to ride to the south road himself at dawn and meet his mother's riders alone and end the matter there. He said it plainly, the way a man states a sum of money he intends to pay. He did not boast. He did not perform. He said, "I know who she will have sent. I know how they fight. I know what I owe. Let me settle it." Halen said, "You cannot win 2 against 1. Valor said, "I do not have to win. I only have to delay them long enough for you to be at the river fords with her." Mireska looked at her husband across the kitchen table. She had not called him her husband in 8 months, even in her own head. She found that the word arrived in her mind tonight without flinching, because she understood for the first time that the husband she had walked out on and the man on the other side of the table were not the same person. That the man on the other side of the table had been built, the same way she had been built in the 8 months between then and now. He had not been built well. He had been built in pain and bad sleep and panic. But he had been built, and he was not the man she had married, and she could let herself say the word. Finally, because the word no longer described what she was being asked to be. She said, "No." Both men looked at her. She said, "I will not have you die for me, Valor. I will not begin the next part of my life over your body. I would never get out from under it. Oren would never get out from under it. You will not buy my freedom by dying for it. That is the same trade you have been trying to make me for half a year, only louder. The answer is no. Valor opened his mouth. She said, I am not finished. He closed his mouth. She said, I will not have you die for me, but I will accept that you will ride with us. Tonight. Now. Not at dawn. Now. You will ride at the rear of our line, and you will be the man who turns when your mother's riders find our trail, and you will be the man who slows them, and then you will ride west after us and not south back toward Hollowmere, and you will live, Valor. You will live, and you will go home, and you will release me before the elder rite, the way I asked. That is the trade. Live, or do not come. Valor stared at her. He said, You are commanding me. She said yes. Halen, on her left, made a small sound that in a less serious moment would have been a laugh. Valor looked at his bandaged hand. He turned it over twice. He looked up at her. He said, All right. That was the second thing the three of them agreed on. They left Senno Cross within the hour. Tevra packed Oren's small cradle of clothes and a sack of dried apples, and a wax-sealed jar of the bitter root tincture, and a tightly wrapped bundle of swaddling wool, and she pressed all of it into Mareska's arms at the door, and she did not weep. The herbsman stood behind her and clasped Halen Vor's wrist in the old way, and said, You bring her back to visit. You hear? And if you do not bring her back, I will come find you. Alpha or no. Halen said, I will bring her back. They rode out of Senno Cross under a thin moon, on the herders' road west, with Halen at the front of the line, and his two riders flanking, and Mareska in the middle on a borrowed roan, with Oren in the carry sling against her chest, and Valor at the rear on his black horse, riding without speaking, with his sword loose at his hip. They rode for 4 hours before the riders found them. Valor's mother had sent 4, not 2. He had been wrong about that. The 4 came up the herders' road at a hard canter, having tracked the line from a half-mile back, and the lead rider was a woman in dark gray with a rider's bow already strung, and Valor saw her first because Valor had been watching the back of the line for 4 hours waiting for exactly this. What happened next happened in a span of time that Mareska, afterward, could not put a number on. Valor turned his black horse on the road. He did not call out. He did not shout her name. He did not look forward to the line. He simply turned the black horse, drew his sword, and rode at the 4 riders at a flat, hard charge. He met the lead rider before her bow could clear a second arrow. He went past her at the gallop, and his sword took her cleanly out of the saddle, and he wheeled the black horse and came back at the second rider before the second rider had registered the first one falling. The second rider was a man twice his weight, and the second rider got a blade up in time, and the 2 of them traded 1 pass and a second pass, and on the 3rd pass, Valor took the man's bridle hand off at the wrist, and the man's horse panicked and bolted, and the man went off the back of the saddle still screaming, and Valor did not stop. Halen had reined up at the first sound and turned in the saddle, and Mareska had reined up beside him, with her hand pressed flat to Oren's small back, and the 2 of them watched, from 100 paces up the road, as Valor Thane fought 2 against 1 in the moonlight on the herders' road, and did not lose. He took the 3rd rider in a clean exchange. The 4th rider, the youngest, threw his sword down in the road and ran. Valor let him go. He sat on the black horse in the middle of the road with 3 bodies around him, and his bandaged hand bleeding fresh through the wrap. And he did not turn back to look at Mareska. And Mareska understood, with a clarity she had not expected, that he was not turning because he could not. That if he turned and saw her face, he would not be able to ride west the way she had told him to. Halen, beside her, said, very low, he held them. Mareska said, yes. Halen said, will he ride west? Mareska said, I do not know. I told him to. He said he would. I do not know if he can. They sat their horses and watched the man on the dark road, and after a long count Valor lifted his sword once, in their direction, in a salute that was not quite a wave and not quite a goodbye, and he turned the black horse west. He did not ride south. He rode west, the way she had told him to. He passed off the moonlit road into the trees, and he was gone. Mireska did not let herself weep. She had Oren against her chest, and 4 hours of hard riding still ahead of her, and a child whose father had just, for the first time in the boy's life, done what his mother had asked. She said to Halen, "Ride." They rode. They reached the river fords at first light. That was where the news met them. A trader on the ford crossing, a man with a mule and a cart of pelts, took one look at Halen Vor and at the woman riding with him and said, "Alpha, I am sorry. You are riding into it. Vorreach is on fire." Halen's face went very still. The trader said, "Riders out of the Hollowmere came down the coast road 3 nights ago. They have taken your hold. They are holding your steward and your sister and the rest of your house. They are flying the Hollowmere banner over your gate. I rode through it yesterday morning. They have an old woman in command. She is keeping the hold sealed, and she has put word out to the southern packs that the new lord of Vorreach is the Alpha of the Hollowmere by treaty." Halen said, "My sister." The trader said, "Alive when I left. They had her in the great hall." Halen Vor turned his horse on the ford in a tight circle once. He looked at Mireska. He said, "She has not been hunting you, Mireska. She has been hunting me. She let her son ride south with the bounty so the Hollowmere force could come down the coast and take my hold while I was here. The riders she sent on the herders' road were the second wave. Insurance. She has been 3 steps ahead of all of us since the festival night. She was never going to let her son release you. She was going to let you die at his side, in my hold, and have the whole South as her dowry by next spring." Mireska sat on the borrowed roan with her son sleeping against her chest at the river fords at first light, and she understood finally what she was facing. Not a man, and not a man's grief, and not even a man's mother. She was facing a house, an old house, a house that had been planning her death since she was 17 and had simply waited for the festival night to begin. Halen said, "I cannot take you to Vorreach. There is no Vorreach to take you to." Mireska said, "No." Mireska said, "We are going back." Halen said, "Back where?" Mireska looked west into the trees, in the direction Valor Thane had ridden 3 hours ago. She said, "We are going to find my husband. We are going to find him before his mother's people do. And then the 3 of us are going to ride north together. And we are going to take the Hollowmere back from the woman who has been running it for 30 years. And we are going to do it before the next moon. Because if we do not, my son is not going to have a single safe road left to ride on for the rest of his life." Halen Vor looked at her for a long moment in the cold light at the river fords. He said, "Yes, my lady." He had not called her my lady before. He did not say it the way Valor's house had said it. He said it the way a man says it to a queen. They found Valor before sundown on the 2nd day. He was on foot when they found him, leading the black horse at a slow walk through a creek bottom under the western pines. The horse was lame in the off-fore. Valor was bleeding through the bandage on his right hand and had a fresh cut above his left eye from a branch he had ridden into in the dark, and he had not eaten since Senno Cross. And when he saw the 3 riders coming up the creek bottom, he reached for his sword with a hand that did not quite close. Then he saw who the riders were, and he stopped. He stood in the creek with the lame horse's reins in his bad hand and the late sun behind him, and he watched Mireska come down the bank toward him, and he did not say anything at all. Mireska said, "Your mother has taken Vorreach." Valor closed his eyes. He said, "Of course she has." She said, "We are riding north tonight. The 3 of us. We are going to take the Hollowmere back. I am not asking you. I am telling you. If you ride with us, You ride under my command until we are inside your own gate. After that, the three of us decide together. If you cannot ride under my command, then walk west, and live, and we will not speak of you again." Valor opened his eyes. He looked at her in the late sun in the creek bottom, with her son tied at her chest, and a borrowed roan blowing behind her, and Halen Vor 10 paces back, with one hand resting near his sword, and the other empty and visible. And Valor Thane did the second thing in their marriage that she had not believed him capable of. He went to his knees in the creek. He did not bow his head. He did not perform. He went to his knees in the running water and put his bandaged hand flat over the binding mark under his collar, and he said, "Your command, my lady. To the gate of my house, and beyond it, if you choose. I will not ride west. I will ride at your stirrup." Halen, behind her, did not move. Mireska said, "Get up, Valor." He got up. They rode north. They rode for 6 days. They did not ride alone. Word had moved faster than any of them. The wool trader who had told her about the bounty in Tevra's kitchen had also, it turned out, told the rest of the river country, and the rest of the river country had been waiting a long time for an excuse to push back against the dowager of the Hollowmere. Riders fell in behind them on the second day. 2 from a small freehold north of Senno Cross. 5 from Brenhall lands. By the 4th day, there were 40. By the 6th day, there were almost 100, and 3 of them were alphas of small free packs who had not bent the knee to Catherine Hold in a generation, and who had ridden out to join Mireska's column the moment word reached them that the lost wife of the Hollowmere was riding home behind a banner that was not quite Hollowmere and not quite Vor Reach, but something new. The banner was Halen's idea. He cut it from the lining of his own riding cloak the second night, and Tevra's husband had pressed a small sewing kit into Mireska's saddlebag at parting, and she stitched a rough device by firelight on the 3rd night, with Orin in her lap. A gray horse, for Halen, a black one, for Valor. And between them, walking forward, a woman in a long cloak with a child in her arms. It was not a heraldic device any packmaster would have approved. By the time they reached the southern boundary of the Hollowmere on the 6th night, every rider in the column knew exactly what it meant. The Hollowmere keep at Catherine Hold was not held against them. The pack second, Valor's own man, had ridden out the day before to meet them on the south road. He came alone. He swung down off his horse and went to one knee in front of Valor's stirrup and said, "My lord, the keep is yours, but the dowager is not in the keep. She left 2 days ago. South. With most of her own house guard. She rode out the moment word reached her that her 4 riders had not come back from the Herder's Road." Valor said, "Where south?" The pack second said, "My lord, she is at Vor Reach. She has Halen Vor's sister still in the Great Hall. She has put word out that she will hang the sister and burn the hold to the ground, unless your wife is delivered to her at Vor Reach Gate, alone, on foot, by sundown tomorrow." Halen made a sound. It was the only sound he had made in 2 hours. Mireska looked at him. She said, "Halen." He said, "Ivana. My sister's name is Ivana. She is 19 years old. She runs my hold while I am south. She is the only family I have left." Mireska closed her eyes. She opened them. She said, "All right." Halen said no. She said, "Halen, listen." He said, "I heard you the first time you said it, and I am saying no the first time. You are not walking into that hold alone. I will not trade my sister for you. I will not let either of you do that arithmetic in front of me. We will ride. Tonight. We will ride hard. We will be at the gate of my hold by midday tomorrow with 100 riders, and we will take the gate by force." Valor said quietly beside her, "You cannot take that gate by force in less than a day. I know my mother. She will have it shut, and she will have your sister in the upper hall with a knife to her, and the moment we hit the wall, she will use the knife. We will lose Avenna, and we will lose half our riders on the wall, and we will still be on the wrong side of the gate at sundown. Halen said. Then what? Valor said. My mother has asked for one woman alone on foot at the gate by sundown. She is going to get her. Just not the woman she asked for. Mireska turned her head. She looked at her husband. She understood. In the same instant she understood she was being asked to choose between two impossible things again, that he was not asking her to choose. He was telling her what he had decided, and he was telling her in front of Halen Vor because he wanted Halen to know, also, that he had decided it. Valor said, I will go to the gate alone, on foot, at sundown. I will go with my hands open. My mother will not refuse me at the gate. She cannot. I am her son, and I am the Alpha of the Hollow Mere, and her own house code does not let her refuse her Alpha at his own ally's gate. She will let me in. She will think she has me. I will get to the upper hall. I will get to Avenna. I will give you a window, and you will take the gate. Halen said. You will not survive that. Valor said. I do not have to survive it. I only have to give you the window. There was a long quiet. Mireska felt under her ribs the strange new thing that had been growing there since the night the binding mark went quiet. It was not the binding mark. It was something else. Something that had been waking, slowly, since the morning Valor had sat on her doorstep and told her the truth about himself. Since the night he had ridden at 4 riders in the moonlight and not lost. Since the moment he had gone to his knees in the creek bottom under the western pines. She had not named it yet, because she was afraid of it. She named it now. She said, No. Both men looked at her. She said, You will not go to the gate alone, Valor. None of us will. We will all 3 go. We will go on foot. We will go with our hands open. Your mother will not refuse the 3 of us at that gate any more than she will refuse you. She has wanted us at her gate since the festival night. She will let us in. And when she lets us in, she will discover that the woman she has been hunting for 9 months is not the woman she thought she was hunting. Valor said, Mireska. Halen said, My lady. She said, I am the bound mate of the Alpha of the Hollow Mere, and the chosen mate of the Alpha of Vor Reach. And I am the mother of the only living heir of 2 pack lines. And I have been told in 2 different ways, in 2 different houses, by 2 different men, that I am someone worth riding through fire for. I am beginning to think they may both have been right. Your mother does not know that yet. I think it is time she did. She did not feel afraid. She felt the thing under her ribs unfurl. She did not yet know what it was. She had a very strong feeling she was about to. They came down the last slope to the gate of Vor Reach, in the long red light of sundown. 3 of them, on foot, the way she had said. Mireska in the middle, Valor on her right, Halen on her left. Their hands were open at their sides. Oren was not with them. Tevra had refused, on Mireska's command, and had taken the boy west to a quiet farmhouse with the column's older riders, and Mireska carried, in the place under her ribs where she had carried him for 9 months, the steady knowledge that wherever this evening ended, her son was on a road that did not run through this gate. The riders waited 2 ridges back, 100 of them. Halen's pack second had the column. The plan was that when the gate opened, when the 3 of them passed inside, the column would move. Not to the wall. To the south postern, the small, unwatched gate that Halen had told them about over the kitchen table at Seno Cross. The gate his sister Ivenna kept the iron key to in a chain around her own throat. Valor had said, My mother will not look for a postern key on a 19-year-old girl. Halen had said, That is because my mother and yours did not raise the same kind of daughter. That had been the closest thing to a smile any of them had managed in 3 days. Now they stopped at 50 paces from the closed gate of Vor Reach, And Mareska Thane raised her empty hands above her head, and she called, in a voice that did not shake. She said, "Mother of my husband, I am here. Open the gate." There was a long silence. Then a horn sounded, 2 short notes, from inside the wall. The gate opened. The Dowager of the Hollowmere stood inside it, on the worn stone of Halen Vor's own courtyard, with Ivenna Vor kneeling in front of her at the end of a short rope, and a knife in her hand. She was a small woman. That was the part Mareska had forgotten. The dowager was a small gray-haired woman in dark wool, no taller than her son's shoulder, with the unhurried bearing of someone who had not run anywhere in 50 years because the world had always been kind enough to stop and wait. She was 68 years old. She had buried her husband 23 winters ago. She had run the Hollowmere ever since, through 3 regents and 1 absent son, and she had never once raised her voice in the great hall at Catherine Hold because she had never once needed to. She looked at Mireska across the courtyard, the way one might look at a stain on a tablecloth. She said, "You brought both of them. How tidy." Mireska said, "I brought all 3 of us, Mother. I brought your son. I brought the man who kept me alive while you tried to have me killed. And I brought myself. You wanted us at this gate. Here we are," the dowager said. "And the boy." Mireska said, "Somewhere you will not find him." The dowager smiled. It was a small, dry smile. She said, "Child, I have wanted you out of my house since the night my son brought you home." I told him then. He did not listen. I have been correcting his hearing ever since. You think this is a confrontation. It is not a confrontation. It is a closing of accounts. She lifted the knife. What happened in the next breath? Mireska would never afterward be able to fully describe to anyone, because what happened in the next breath happened inside her. And there were no words in any of the 3 pack tongues she spoke for what it was. The thing under her ribs unfurled. She had thought for 3 days that it would be a wolf. She had thought when she finally named the warmth that what was rising in her was the second nature that pack-blooded women sometimes carried, and that hers had been waiting 4 winters and 8 months to come up. She had thought she was about to shift. She did not shift. What she had carried in herself, since she had walked out of Catherine Hold on the festival night, was not a second body. It was a first one. It was the woman she had been before her marriage, the 17-year-old girl who had nodded at a wedding oath she had not yet learned to refuse, and who had lain quiet under that oath for 4 winters waiting for permission to come up again. The thing rising in Mireska now was not a wolf. It was a self. It was the first self. The one she had agreed at 17 to bury in order to be married. And it came up. It came up through her chest and into her throat and into her open mouth, and she heard her own voice say, in a register she had never used in her life, in a register that the dowager of the Hollowmere had certainly never been spoken to in. She said, "Put the knife down." The dowager's hand stopped. It stopped in midair, halfway to Ivenna Vor's throat. Mireska watched the old woman's hand stop, and she saw the small, confused flicker on the old woman's face, and she understood, with a cold, clear pleasure, that the dowager had not stopped because the dowager had decided to stop. The dowager had stopped because the woman in front of her had told her to. That was the gift. That was what 9 months of building had built in her. Not a wolf. A voice that the dowager could not, for the first time in her own long life, refuse. Mireska said, again, and the courtyard went very quiet around her. She said, "Put the knife down. Step away from the girl. Stand against the wall. You are not in command in this courtyard any longer. You have not been in command in this courtyard since the moment I walked through this gate. You will do what I tell you, Mother, because you are an old woman in a borrowed hold, and I am the only person standing between you and the gate." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The dowager lowered the knife. She lowered the knife slowly, the way a woman lowers a teacup she has been holding too long, and she set it on the stone of the courtyard at her feet, and she stepped back from Ivana Vor, and she stood against the wall. She did not understand what had happened. Mireska saw that she did not understand, and she did not bother to explain. Behind her, somewhere south, a horn sounded twice. That was Helen's column. Ivana Vor looked up from the stone with the rope still on her neck and said in a small, bright voice, "Brother, is that you?" Halen Vor crossed the courtyard at a run and went to his knees beside his sister and cut the rope off her with his belt knife in 3 strokes, and Ivana Vor put both her arms around her brother's neck and did not cry, because Vor women, it turned out, did not cry in courtyards. And Mireska looked at the two of them and felt, under her ribs, the new thing settle. It was not unfurling anymore. It had unfurled. It was simply, now, who she was. She turned to her husband. Valor had not moved. He stood 3 paces behind her left shoulder with his bandaged hand at his side and his eyes on his mother against the wall. And his face was the face of a man who had just understood, finally, the shape of every room he had grown up in. Mireska said, "Vylor." He looked at her. She said, "What do you want to do with her?" He said very quietly, "That is not my decision." She said, "It is your house." He said, "No, my lady. The Hollomere has not been my house for 9 months. It has been her house. I am taking it back tonight. After tonight it will be our house, if you will share it. But this decision is not mine. She came here for you. She will answer to you." Mireska looked at the small gray woman against the wall. She said, "Mother of my husband, you will be removed to the elder right, and you will be tried before the assembled houses, and you will face the judgment of the wider pack. You will not be killed. I will not begin the next winter with your blood on my hands, but you will not see Catherine Hold again, and you will not see Vor Reach again, and you will not see your grandson, ever. You have spent 23 years arranging the deaths of women who inconvenienced your house. You will spend the rest of yours alone in a cell on the northern coast, learning what it is to inconvenience no one." The dowager of the Hollomere did not answer her. She had no answer left to give. Halen Vor's pack second came through the open gate at a hard walk with a half-dozen riders at his back, and the courtyard filled with men who had been kept out of their own hold for 8 days, and the Hollomere house guard laid down their weapons because, as one of them said later in the kitchens, they had ridden south on a dowager's order, and they were not fools enough to die for an order that had just been refused, in their hearing, by a woman they could not look in the face. It was over before the moon was up. They stayed at Vor Reach for 3 nights. They stayed because Ivana Vor would not let her brother leave until she had fed him twice, and looked at his hand and rebandaged it herself, and because Halen would not leave until he had walked every wall of his own hold and stood in every room of it once with his own boots on, and because Mireska would not leave until she had washed Ivana's hair for her in a basin with warm water and a sliver of southern soap, the way one woman does for another after an evening neither of them will speak of again. On the 3rd evening, the 3 of them sat on the western wall of Vor Reach and watched the sun go. Valor was the one who spoke first. He said, "Mireska, I came south to release you. I said it badly. I said it under your eaves with my hands shaking. I want to say it cleanly now, in front of the man who has earned the right to hear it." He turned on the wall to face her. He said, "I release you from the binding I laid at 17. Before this man, before this hold, before whatever powers of the right still listen at sundown, I release you. The mark on your collarbone is yours. It is no longer mine. You owe me no hearth, no roof, no bed. You owe me, if you will give it, only what the mother of a son owes the father of a son, which is the courtesy of his name on the boy's tongue when the boy is old enough to ask. He took the bandage off his right hand. He laid the cloth between them on the wall. He said, "I will not ask anything else of you for the rest of my life." Mireska looked at the cloth on the wall. She looked at the man on her right and the man on her left. She had thought, for 9 months, that this would be the moment she ran into someone's arms, that she would weep, and a man would gather her, and the weight of 9 months would fall off her at last in the place she had been running toward. It was not that moment. It was a quieter one. She did not run anywhere. She sat on the wall between two good men and felt, finally, that there was no one to run toward, because she had stopped running. She had arrived. The place she had been running toward, it turned out, was not a man. It was herself. She picked up the bandage from the wall. She folded it. She handed it back to Valor. She said, "I accept the release. Thank you." She turned to Halen. She said, "Halen Vor, I came north to take a holdback, and on the way I made a promise to you in a creek bottom under the western pines. I have not forgotten it. But I am not the woman you asked anymore. I am someone newer than her. If you still want me, you will have to ask the new one." Halen looked at her in the long red light. He said, "My lady, I would be honored to ask the new one." He said it gravely. He said it without performance. He said it in front of her husband. Mireska smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 4 winters and 9 months. She said, "Then ask me in a year. Ask me when Orin is walking. Ask me when the elder right has heard the dowager's case and the houses have settled. Ask me when I have lived under no one's roof for a turn of the seasons and have learned the shape of a day that I make myself. If, after that, you still want to ask, I will give you my answer then." Halen said, "A year, my lady." Valor, on her other side, did not speak. He nodded once, very slowly. He understood, she saw, that he had been given a place at the table also. Not the place he had once held. Not the place he had ridden south to ask for. A smaller place. A truer one. The place of the man who had fathered a child he did not yet know how to love, and who would, if he was patient and, if he was lucky, be permitted to learn. It was a better deal than he had earned. He took it. That was almost the end. Almost. There is one more thing, because the listener deserves it, and because the woman who told this story to her grandchildren told them this part every time with a particular small softness, and we should keep faith with her. 3 years later, on a spring afternoon at a small farmhouse in the river country, with goats in the yard and a gray horse staked on the long line, and Tevra's herbsman husband shouting at someone in the kitchen about the price of honey, a woman sat on a worn step in the sun with a 4-year-old boy at her knee and a baby girl on her hip. The boy had dark hair and the calm, dark blue eyes of his father. The girl had hair the dark red of riverbed clay, and her eyes were a startling pale gold. The woman was 25 years old. She had a small old silver pin in her hair. She had a quiet white binding mark under her collarbone that was now, by every law of the right, only her own. A man came up the road on a gray horse. He swung down at the gate and he tied the horse and he walked to the step, and he did not say anything for a long moment because the boy had already run to him with his arms up, and the baby on the woman's hip had already begun to laugh. The man crouched. He took the boy under one arm and the baby under the other. He looked up at the woman on the step. He said, "My lady, I came to ask you a question." The woman on the step said, "You are 6 months early." He said, "I know." She said, "You are an alpha of a freehold. You should not be making a habit of being early on important matters." He said, "I know. May I ask anyway?" She looked at him for a long, quiet moment in the afternoon sun. She said, "Yes, Halen Vor, you may ask." He asked. She said yes. That night, in a small farmhouse in the river country, the woman who had once been called Mireska of the Hollowmere lay down beside 2 sleeping children and a man who, every morning, handed her the day and she pressed her palm to her own collarbone in the dark. The mark there was quiet. It had been quiet for a long time. It was hers. It would always, from this moment forward, be hers. She slept. Outside, in the long plains where no pack lord claimed authority, and no alpha thought to look. The wind moved over the grasses, and the river ran, and somewhere far to the north the lights of Kethrynhold burned low, and a man named Valor Thane sat alone in the great hall of his keep and read, for the third time that month, the small hand-stitched book of stories from the southern coast that his own son had sent him for his name day. He turned the last page. He smiled. It was a small, unpracticed smile. He was, slowly, learning. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.